Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Podcana episode 66. This week, we are not joined by Moen as he is on vacation, but we're looking towards Toronto, the Disney Lorcana challenge that is set for, but has the errata version of Bucky, which will be live. Kawa is testing for this tournament. I was planning to go, but it seems like with my upcoming move to San Diego, that's going to be kind of a big ask. Do need to pack, get ready for that. So I think I'm gonna skip it. I think we're recording on a what is it? It's a Wednesday here. Yeah, I'm probably not gonna go. Let's go. Probably not gonna go. I haven't bought my ticket or anything yet. So yeah, I just got a bit busy with that stuff. So I'll be cheering on from the sideline. Colin, you've been doing a lot of testing. I connected you with some of the flesh and blood boys that have been testing as well. How's it been going for you?
Yeah, it's been fun. I've been testing in multiple ways. The most efficient way is probably being with those boys on Tabletop Sim. It's jamming loads of different games. It's been fun because they've kind of been testing a lot of the decks and finding what they want to play. I've mainly been testing one deck. I'm on like Amber Emerald. I think that's probably going to be my deck choice going into the tournament. I think it's quite an interesting pick. Previously, its like worst matchup was Bucky Green Steel. And with that out of the meta, I think it has a decent shot of doing well. We've seen it make multiple day twos for previous challenges. I think it made day two in like Chicago, Dallas, and Bologna. Not too sure about Bochum, but I think it has a good place in the meta right now. And maybe even a bit of a surprise factor, as in if people haven't tested against the deck enough, then they won't really know how to play against it. The potential that this deck has to turbo discard the opponent's hand is kind of insane, but it's also very different towards how Bucky Green Steel did it, because Bucky Green Steel was just like spam as many Floodborns as you can, get the board, your opponent has no cards, you win the game. Whereas this one is, I feel like I have way more decisions that I can make in this deck compared to Bucky Green Steel. Obviously, you have some really strong openers, such as, establishing a 2-drop on 2, whether that be the Emerald Ursula to discard a song from your opponent's hand, or Sir Hiss, which can check Flynn, which is nice against RA. And on turn 3, you can do Prince John, sing a discard song with Sir Hiss if you want to gain a card, and then you go into turn 4, you do the You've Forgotten Me. So it has some pretty powerful lines, and I think the Under the Sea Kida combo is actually really, really cool, really, really fun. I've been enjoying it. But yeah, before we go forward, I want to say, Brendan, thank you for connecting me with these amazing players, because even though they're transitioning over to like a different game, they are very well versed in knowing, oh, like this is correct, that's correct, and we've been kind of openly talking to our players as we're playing, and that's helped a lot. But they're very in tune with the game, as to be expected, of course.
Yeah, Tar keeps DMing me last night. He was like, games? I'm like, bro, it's 10:30 at night on a Tuesday. I'm 30 years old. What the fuck do you think I'm doing? I'm sleeping, bro. Just absolutely grinding. And Tark, by the way, Tark is a full-on doctor of humans, which is crazy because he's also one of the best card game players that exists. If you could sum up the changes to the set 4 metagame post Bucky errata, now that you've had a chance to test it, how would you do that?
I think the biggest thing that's changed is any of those weird evasive tech cards that were in decks previously have just been taken out. Like, I don't think there's any reason for anyone to be running Peter Pan Shadow in RA anymore. Like, you can just play better cards. Initially, I thought that there might be a reduction in brawls, since kind of Diablo was the key card that you needed to disrupt. Even though, like, Diablo was one of the problematic cards, Bucky probably being the bigger problem. But I figured, maybe people will cut one or two of them down because they're not expecting so much of it. But turns out Brawl right now is still, like, a fine card. The deck I play, Amber Emerald, like, another reason why I'm actually opting to play it is it's one of the few decks that really still utilizes that Shift Diablo package. And if that can't be removed early, it's, like, such a huge win condition. So, against my deck, Brawls and stuff are really, really good still, but I think overall they're probably staying. Any other developments? I think if there's going to be, I think overall we should just expect more Ruby Amethyst to appear at Toronto, because again, one of its worst matchups, Green Steel, has left the meta. So if you're, I don't know, like if you're a Blue Steel player, I'd say maybe you could, if you didn't have the Argus, the 4/1 Cyclops in your deck, maybe throw him in, or maybe even up your count by 1 or 2 of him, because if you're expecting a lot of Ruby Amethyst, that's probably a key card to play. Make sure you have still have enough efficient 2 damage removal spells. If it's Baboom, if it's Fire the Cannons, I think all of those cards are still going to be really relevant. But my prediction going into Toronto, I think Ruby Amethyst will still be the most played deck. And I think behind it will probably be Amber Steel. I think Amber Steel is in a great spot going into Toronto. So it's funny because over all of the previous challenges, it's always been the deck that's kind of just like pushed me out for making day 2. It's always been the loss I've got. So yeah, hopefully I can overcome it this time. But it's still going to be a fantastic pick for this tournament, in my opinion.
Yeah, I could see a lot of Amber Steel showing up for sure. How much Emerald do you think will be showing up? I mean, obviously you mentioned playing an Emerald deck, but do you think it's going to be like, you think it'll like an Emerald deck will be in top 3 most played deck, top 4, top 5 most played deck?
Not at all. Not at all. No. Like
surprising that you can't cut any brawls then. Like you talk about these decks not cutting the brawls. If an Emerald deck is not even, top 3 and you're running 4, I understand Brawl has sort of additional.
Brawl
can hit Flynn.
Brawl's versatility. Sure, I can hit Flynn. I think even Brawl being able to hit a card like Aerial is probably quite relevant. Like, because Aerials, you want to remove singers.
Really? It's yeah, I understand because Aerial sings, but like if you think about that trade on a fundamental level,
I know the trade isn't.
So
I know it's not a good. I know it's not a good trade. I do understand that, but just like to have some sort of removal options before you get into the likes of Madame Medusa and stuff. I do think actually the one thing I want to say about Ruby Amethyst as well is previously, I don't know, like there's always a debate of the ratios of like, you've got the Medusas against the Tremaines, or do you play any B Kings or whatever. I think if you're generally expecting more of a Sapphire focused metagame and a lot of Sapphire decks to appear, I think you should definitely consider maybe trying to put in 1 to 2 Tremaines. I think I still just prefer Tremaine in general over the B Kings because it just works so well against those Sapphire decks. The reason I'm talking about this conversation right now is like literally earlier today, Tariq was saying, what are the ratios? Do you think we should be kind of working on this? And I think there's definitely numbers you can kind of settle on. I think I think the B preps can come down. I think the B preps can be on like 2 or 3 right now personally. Medusa can probably be 3, and then Tremaine can maybe be 2. I think that's like a ratio that I would be comfortable with if I was playing Ruby Amethyst. What are your thoughts on the ratio right now?
Well, so the additions of Tremaines are interesting. So the more Ruby Amethyst there is in a metagame, the less Lady Tremaines you want. I mean, that's not the only factor, but that is a factor because Lady Tremaine is just so ass for in the Ruby Amethyst mirror. Also, yeah, so it's interesting because the more Amber Steel there is, I feel like to an extent, the more B preps you kind of want because Amber Steel has this ability to flood the board after casting a whole new world, and a lot of times when you're playing against that matchup, especially when in it double time if they're not playing flutes, a lot of your big outs are going to be prepared. I understand they can make you discard it as well, but I do find that be prepared is very good in the Amber Steel matchup, and it can be quite important sometimes. So expecting more Amber Steel and playing less B prep is interesting. I also think I understand there's probably going to be a bunch of Sapphire decks running around. I mean, that kind of makes sense in this metagame, but I would hesitate to put the Lady Tremaine in. I haven't tested as much in the current metagame, but I would definitely, if I'm expecting a bunch of Ruby Amethyst mirrors, the last thing I want in my deck is an uninkable Lady Tremaine that gets hit by Madame Medusa and is potentially taking out something like a like a 1-drop or a Madame Imp Snake because it's just sitting on board. My opponent's like, oh, I'll just sack this.
Yeah, and then your opponent just Medusa's the Tremaine, right? After they play
rough.
Yeah. That's fair.
How have you guys landed on the multiple Tremaines? Because I would have thought that if I was expecting a bunch of Ruby Amethyst mirrors, the way that I would tech my deck is probably more in line of increasing my equity in the castle. So things like Merlin Crab had made their ways out of the list, and Merlin Crab allowed you to develop Crab on 3, then 4 play Fox, and you could 1-hit the castle. You also have cards that are very good in the mirror, like, it's probably outdated this time, but if you think back to previous sets, things like the 2-drop Cusco just gave you that additional reach of card advantage. Like, I think there's some early curve additions.
That's a card that I know Tariq was definitely considering was the Cusco. Also looking at the mini again, possibly 1/3 mini.
1/3 mini also. That's definitely an answer. So the issue with the mini is it's going to get, it just has
gonna get Brawl,
it's going to get
Medusa,
it's going to get
right?
Brawl.
Yeah.
So it's like, all these people have this ass card in their deck in the form of Brawl, and you just give them an opportunity to kind of use it.
Yeah.
Where Yeah, I think in the Ruby Amethyst Mirror, like one of your biggest threats are your opponent's going to be curving castles on you because your only real out to it these days are things like the Maui and also kind of developing on the board early, which that deck doesn't really do anymore because it kind of cantrips its one drops. So
I think
yeah,
the
it's
mini, I think
interesting.
the mini is just like, if you think about a lot of the decks in the meta, it's still quite easily removed. I feel if you're playing against Amber Steel, they have even a bit of a board. They can just strength it or Zeus it most of the time. In the mirror match, they got Brawl, they got Medusa against. Same for Blue Steel, right? They can do, I don't know, Baboom, Tink, or they can do Zeus as well. And then even against Red Blue, especially that like heavy item build that we saw win Bologna, the 3-drop Sisu, right? Just kind of dunks on mini. So yeah, I don't know. Like it's definitely an interesting call. We've seen how prevalent mini's been before, and if you want to slot some extra tools in there, maybe it's worth testing. I kind of do like the idea of Cusco maybe a little bit more though.
Yeah, I yeah. So Cusco's fine. I think that it's interesting in the context of what your turn two is. I think the turn two is a bit it's contested right now with the Flynn, which is going to be your better 2-drop.
Mm-hmm.
The Kuzco will give you the ability to outgrind your opponent, but I find the Ruby Amethyst mirror feels more like a tempo and aggressive mirror rather than a card advantage mirror. Card advantage is kind of like the fallback. It's like if all else fails, they'll try to grind you out and out card advantage you.
I feel like that's it can definitely be aggressive, but then there are still a lot of mirror matches that I've seen that come down to whoever gets
it's
more
like
rabbits first, right? Realistically, like that can happen a lot.
If one opponent doesn't scam the other, it tends to go super, super late.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, for me, from a theory perspective, I'd be particularly interested in like a couple crabs because the ability to just absolutely one tap your opponent's castle when they're not expecting it, and I feel like this is a metagame where in the Ruby Amethyst Mirror, players are taking aggressive castle lines because most players don't have access to tech cards that can deal with it very, very very cleanly. Especially if you're on the draw, your opponent can really bully you with a castle if you're not able to develop on board earlier. So that would be the card I would be looking towards, to be honest. And then me and Tark were actually talking about the Cusco a couple weeks ago. I just don't know where he landed from there.
I'm a
But
big fan
I
of
would
the
go.
crab. I really do like the crab because it's also pretty good going into if you're against red blue, which you should be favored generally anyways. But
Yeah.
it's just like another kind of option that you can use to potentially take out the the Tamatoa, right? If you don't have a prep or something. Do some bounce stuff.
I would say you just kind of take the L on Tamatoa. Like, I really don't like Lady Tremaine as a card, and I think it's particularly bad in a Ruby Amethyst dominated metagame. So, yeah, I understand Tamatoa comes down, you have maybe 2 to 3 B preps in your deck, and you're like, fuck, that card destroys me. So what? Like, you're already favored into that matchup. What makes you favored in that matchup is not trying to take them to the long game anyway. It's not usually trying to outgrind them. Though you can when they're on bad draws. It's more taking an aggressive line and sort of bullying them out of the match. So, yeah, that's kind of always been my philosophy against Tamatoa is like, yeah, I understand that if you don't have B King Undisputed and you don't have Lady Tremaine in your deck, there's a Tamatoa that will be put down on the board in front of you, and in one match out of who knows how big the sample size is, you will be able to do nothing and you will just lose. That's fine. I would rather have better cards in my deck that have more, a better range across the actual metagame that will show up in the form of maybe more Medusas than add a card like Lady Tremaine into my deck to deal with the Tamatoa. You guys could have gotten to a different place in testing where you feel like you need that you need to be able to go longer against these Sapphire decks, but my ethos has always been do what your deck does best against Sapphire, which is be aggressive. And the thing is like even if you have the Lady Tremaine, you're still very unfavored in the long game against any Sapphire deck. They have a much better draw package than you, like a much better draw package.
So
in general,
the next question I have for you, Brendan, is how do you feel about Big Sisu? Where are we landing on Big Sisu? Are we cutting Big Sisu completely? Do you think that was played a lot to really combat the Emerald Steel matchup? Because what I will say is, if a Ruby Amethyst opponent has that against my deck, I just die. The card absolutely wipes me. But luckily, because it's an 8 cost uninkable, if it's in the hand early or if they're kind of holding it, I just have to be aware of that Sisu shift. There are a lot of times where I can just do like I said, You've Forgotten Me and sing Sudden Chill, and then the card's kind of gone. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, Well, you did say played a lot. I don't think it was played a lot. I think it made its way into like one of the decks that did well, and then like maybe some people copied it, but that was like a last minute tech card that Ed Chu added into the deck. So I don't. There's almost no way. So even if we had run back Dallas, we decided to do Dallas again the next weekend, I probably and I said to net deck Ed, I probably still wouldn't put that card in my deck. Like I understand it looked pretty good on stream because it came at an opportune time, but I think it's for the most part a bad card. It's like it can be good in a situation where you make a very accurate meta call. But yeah, no chance. I mean, if I'm gonna talk shit about Lady Tremaine, there's no way I'm putting 8 cost Uninkable Sisu in my deck. We're talking about, I'm low on a card that has minimal sort of meta impact and is uninkable. So it's like increase the cost by 2 and sort of increase the blank.
Yeah, I'm just even thinking it doesn't even really help that much against Amber Steel, right? Like sure it would take out like Ariels, Rapunzels, stuff like that, but like they're probably gonna have I don't know, like Robin Hoods, Smees, stuff like that. I think beat prep in general is just gonna be way more effective than this weird, because like after the Sisu comes down, then the Amber Steel player should realistically be able to remove it quite easily. So
yeah, I feel like you're usually not at parity on board with them anyway because half their deck is removal. So the impact of a one-sided B prep is a little bit less than it would be in another matchup because usually they're sort of dominating board anyway. So I do think that B prep is probably a superior card. They can't make you discard the uninkable Sisu, but Sisu, the 8 cost Sisu is just it's gonna be really rough in a lot of other matchups, and you really got to consider that. Again, so getting back to the fundamentals, if I was going to play Ruby Amethyst and I was thinking about how do I change my deck in this new metagame, I would be looking more towards the earlier curve rather than the later for my additions to the deck.
Makes sense. Yeah. Cool. All right. I guess we'll move on to the spilled ink section. This is the listener question section. If you guys want to have your questions read out on the next episode of the podcast, be sure to leave a comment down below. All right. The first comment is from Doctor. Says went undefeated into a heavy steel song meta, ran Ruby Sapphire, Chicha into Quill / Mickey Mouse into Donald Duck, and it felt amazing. So yeah, just for context, we were talking about Toronto, but now we are going to jump into some of the set 5 stuff that people have been testing, because I will say I've been doing my internal testing with the Fab Boys and stuff like that, but also I've very, very, very much been enjoying Pixelborn Connect. The entire weekend I pretty much played on that, and the main reason I did it was I was still testing my set 4 deck, which isn't great practice realistically in a set 5 meta, but I think it was important for me with that deck to get a lot of reps in to just get certain play patterns down, and kind of because with the Amber Emerald deck, I think it's really important. Yes, you can do a lot of discard stuff at the start. You're not really going to control board. It's once you do that kind of key to under the sea turn, it's really important to figure out how you're going to be taking the game back from there, because your biggest questers are only realistically going to be stuff like Prince John. So it's a very slow crawl back to then get to 20 and then continue either bouncing their cards back to their hand, using muses to bounce Ariel back to the hand. So I think I was glad to get as much practice as I did utilizing Pixelborn Connect against even these set 5 decks, because it just helped me kind of optimize those play patterns, which was really, really good. So I just want to say again, shout out to Pavel, what he's done for this. I've really been enjoying it, especially for the fact that I think it's cool to include the social element again in this kind of online webcam play where you are like interacting with your opponents and you can have a conversation and talk about the decks. Obviously, like the downside being that you can't just test decks, the cards aren't free, you do have to own the cards. But I saw a lot of people playing with like proxies and stuff like that and said, I'm playing with proxies, just when it gets to it, it'll be the backside of a card, I'll tell you what it is or whatever. So that the whole experience was really, really nice. But yeah, so Doctor says went undefeated into a heavy steel song meta, Ruby Sapphire, Chicha into Quill, Mickey Mouse into Donald Duck, and I felt amazing. So I obviously wasn't here for last week's episode. What were your thoughts on like the kind of Mickey into Donald play? Because Donald you're also inking the top card of your deck, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, so the way me and Moyne described it is that we're particularly interested in Donald's 5-drop, because if you think about the other 5-drops in the Sapphire decks, particularly what was Sapphire Steel, the ones that could sing a whole new world, some of them are kind of antithetical to what that line, right? So if you think about Beast Tragic Hero, it's like, yeah, that's a good 5-drop, but if you're going to be singing a whole new world anyway, is like that really the card that you would want to be curving to on 5?
Mm.
And you think about Cogsworth as well. Cogsworth is fine; it gives you this impact on board. But like, if we think about if you're planning to do turbo ramp, drop 5-drop, sing a whole new world, and refill your hand, there's currently nothing better that is more sort of congruent with that plan, in my opinion, than a 5-drop that comes down and just ramps you further, because that's exactly what you want. You want more resources so you can deploy your hand faster once you do refill it. So Donald Duck just seems like the perfect card to curve into if you're trying to do that Sapphire Steel turbo ramp whole new world thing.
Yeah, and that the play that Doctor's talking about, which is the Chicha into Quill or Mickey on turn 3, is really good because you have the option to fish for the whole new world if you need it, or just like fish for more cards. I think Chicha is a really, really, really good card. Have you been able to test at all, Brennan? Any Sapphire stuff or Set 5 stuff? No, you kind of been sticking like me, sticking to your whatever testing you've done has just been like, you know, the Set 4 stuff.
Yes, I'm also very much missing Pixelborn right now, to be honest. Like it's tough out here. I don't Pixelborn Connect. It's just like I just wish I could play more, because I used to. We talked about this, like what are the effects of losing Pixelborn, and you know how does that sort of hurt our experience with the game? And what it came down to for me personally the most is like I used to watch Savija's stream was on the background every day for me, like every day, and I love that. And I would also, when I had 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, I would queue up a game and I would play pretty much every single day. And now I don't really have I don't have that kind of exposure to the game, because nowadays it's like, okay, got to hit up the boys, like got to get on Tabletop Simulator, and it's like so clunky, and you got to make sure other people are ready to go, and like what decks do they want to play. It's just, it's just a lot worse, to be honest. So I'm really missing Pixelborn with the addition of a new set to Lorcana. Like that, yeah, that was really nice. Those were the days.
Yeah, those were the days indeed. But yeah, that sounds like an interesting deck. Glad it worked out for you so far. Next comment we have is from Robbie. Spilled Ink. How far down the tier list does Green Steel fall in set 5 without Bucky? Is the mill or pure discard better than your opinion? So I faced a little bit of like Green Steel on Pixelborn Connect with like some set 5 stuff. It had like the Clarabelles. It had like the 1-drop Steel Mickey to try and shift into the 5-drop one. So most of these versions, there's either just kind of still like a Green Steel aggro discard version, or there's this Green Steel kind of mill deck, but that just wants to play like a whole new world as fast as possible. So it just has like so many different like shift lines. The deck seemed interesting, but I haven't played against it enough to see if it's like a very relevant deck. So far, I'm not like overly impressed with it. I think there's more powerful things you can do in the meta right now. But I think overall Green Steel in general is just gonna be worse than what it was with Bucky. It's never going to be better. It's never going to be the same. It's just going to be worse. It's going to be different. Not to say that the mill package can't work, but so far, yeah, it just hasn't. I think if you still want to play like discard stuff, the Amber Emerald deck is really, really good, and you're still going to make like a lot of decisions with that deck. So I think my favorite thing about Emerald overall, and probably a big reason why I still wanted to lean towards it going into Toronto, is I just find that 2-drop Ursula is such a great tech card against songs in general, and so many. I mean, every deck in the meta runs key cards that are songs. So like, if you're on the play against the Ruby Sapphire player, you have the potential to snipe the one jump, which could be detrimental against any of the steel decks. You can get rid of the whole new world against the Ruby Amethyst deck. You can get rid of the B prep, and I really like to have the option of that card in particular. So I hope Emerald does stick around. I hope it does kind of get better. So far in set 5, I think it's probably its best pairing has actually been maybe there's 2 of them. I think it's been Amber Emerald, which is basically still the songs deck that I'm playing now, except it's included stuff like You're Welcome, which is quite a good card in that deck, because I feel like it enables the deck to now be able to interact with location cards, which previously was the deck's biggest downfall, besides utilizing a card like Cricky. So I think You're Welcome can fit in there quite nicely, and you've got cards like Ariel, the Muses that, as 4-cost cards or Singer 5 cards can sing that song quite easily. Might even mean that you can slot in the 2-drop Amber Ursula, the Singer 4, if you want to utilize the You're Welcome a little bit more. But that's kind of my opinion on where Emerald sits in set 5, and Emerald Steel for me so far just hasn't really been doing it.
Yeah, I honestly haven't had too much exposure to the deck for set 5, so I can't really comment on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next comment is from Peter. Question: You've talked about going first or second in limited and constructed, and almost it's always better to start to have ink advantage and be the aggressor, but you lose card advantage. How would you feel if the opening turn would change and the first player draws a card with its opening turn, but the second player inks the top or bottom card of their deck before it's the first turn? So the first player now has initiative and card advantage, but loses ink advantage. Would this balance it more in regards to constructed and or limited? This is similar, but yet different to like kind of how Hearthstone handles it in a way. In terms of Hearthstone, geez, I haven't played Hearthstone so long. I can't remember if you go first in Hearthstone if you do draw a card to begin with. But obviously, like the opponent gets the coin, and that's kind of like their mana advantage. So we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but without dramatically changing the rules, I think that is something that could be interesting. Is, you know, inking the top card of your deck. But I feel like most players. I mean, this is the conversation that we've had the whole time. Most players like, oh, but I want to know what that card is because it's like definitely gonna impact it. We've had this conversation, you know.
Doesn't it just kind of makes the problem happen the other way, right? Because I think a lot of the first player, second player ink disparity, what it comes down to is like there's some cards that are just very. You just can't really do anything about them if you're behind on the ink, so you end up being like 2 turns behind rather than 1. So an example is like Beast Tragic Hero.
Mm-hmm.
If your opponent goes, okay, ink 5, Beast Tragic Hero, go to your turn. You have 4 ink and you go 5. Unless you're playing Dragonfire, what's your answer? You don't really have one. It's like your answers exist at 6. It's just how the game is balanced. So now you're 2 turns behind the Beast Tragic Hero, which is rough. Like that's where you kind of get owned by that card. Where if you have the ink advantage, they go, you know, ink 5, play Beast, and you're already on 5. Go to your turn, ink 6, play Madame Medusa. It's like, okay, I had an answer. I just think a lot of the answers don't exist, and that's obviously a very specific example, but another card that's very pervasive for first turn or first player, second player advantage is a whole new world. Because your opponent goes first, they're like, turbo dump my hand, play my quill. You know, I'm taking more turns than you, or I'm you know, deploying more of my resources. I'm getting rid of more of my resources, and then I'm casting a whole new world and refilling my hand. I guess that would kind of be a little bit better in this scenario if you were able to ink the top. But there's just a few cards in the game.
For this example, yeah, sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but for this example, I'm assuming that if the top card of the deck gets inked when it passes to the second player, that's going to come in exerted, right? Or is that going to be like you can play a turn 2 card on turn 1 basically, right? Because that does change things as well. Or if it does come in exerted, then it means you're playing a 1-drop on 1, your opponent goes to 2, and then on your turn 2. You're playing a 3-cost card.
Yeah.
So you just skip your turn 2.
I think it would just have similar. I think you would have a pretty similar experience where it would just be best to go second because it's just best. Yeah. I think it's just you want to have the ink advantage. So I think the fundamental question here is at what state is card advantage equal to ink advantage? I think the way the game is currently balanced in the current metagame, 1 card is not equivalent to a single ink advantage. The ink advantage is stronger.
Yeah, I think I agree. For sure.
The coin is also different, by the way. Like, the coin is interesting.
Yep.
So the coin in Hearthstone is like you get this thing that you start with if you go second, and then at some point you can just gain a resource for that turn, but you don't get it permanently. That would be a bit different in Lorcana. Like it would help my first example there, where someone plays a turn 5 beast and you're going into your ink 5 turn. We could go, okay, ink 5, coin, Madame Medusa, but I think it just kind of works for my very specific example.
Yeah,
it works for my very specific example. But a lot of this comes down to first player, second player advantage. I think in Lorcana comes down to the removal is very overcosted and bad. So the threats that come down usually cannot be efficiently answered with removal that costs the same amount. It just doesn't really work like that. And at the same time, the last thing I want to say in this is that the first player, second player advantage, I know it can feel like a lot, and I think it's been worse in the past, but they also want that to be a thing. That's like an intentional part of game design. They don't want it to be kind of equal or 50-50, because this adds a level of variance into the game that is important.
Hmm.
It's like when people try to critique Magic the Gathering, the first thing they do is like, "Oh, lands are clearly terrible." Well, they're not. It's definitely a bell curve. It's when you first encounter lands in Magic, like, wow, this is so stupid, and then you get to the top, and you come back where you're like, you get to the top of the bell curve, you're like, okay, this makes sense. It adds variance, it makes games unique. It gives bad players a chance to win. There's games are not hopeless. Where in Flesh and Blood, like, it's fucking hopeless. You're not gonna win. And you get to the end of the bell curve, you're like, okay, well, I understand the value of this, but it's not a great game experience. Where I think first player, second player advantage is kind of like that as well. It's an important aspect of the game to have like this variance lever. And I know it's hard to grasp if you're like a competitive player, but yeah, if you want to get like a real world example, go try playing Go to your local Flesh and Blood sort of tournament and see how well you do for months on end. You will just lose for a long time, and it's to be honest, it's not fun. It's not a fun experience to do that.
All right, next question is from, our next comment is from YOLO. Blurple is a new deck that Set 5 has unlocked. Most excited for this, the best chance to play the new Mufasa. So this is a deck that I played a lot against over the weekend. A lot of people on Pixborn Connect were testing Blurple. And I ultimately think that there's a lot of players that are building the deck wrong. There's one player I faced that I think had actually quite an interesting build of Blurple, which ultimately I think it's just more of a mid-range deck than it is of, I don't know. It just can't be a control deck because it lacks that removal, right? It's like, I think the most optimal removal that you want to use in that deck is like, you can have a couple of Let It Goes that can be really, really good, but I don't even think that deck ran Hades. I think at its core it utilized Amethyst's ability to exert opponents' characters. So a card that I've been more impressed by it than my initial reaction to the card is that 5-drop Elsa, the one with Rush and Evasive, and when it comes into play, it can tap one of your opponent's characters. That's been pretty good, just as a general, like, it can take out some evasive cards. It can just, if you've got other cards on the board, it can exert something so that your other character can challenge into it. And then once you have that card established, that's actually a pretty good shift target into the 8-drop Elsa, which I think is a key card in Blurple right now. I haven't really seen too many people do any of the Mufasa stuff, but I think Blurple in general is, you want to be utilizing cards more so like Tipo and Mickey rather than the item stuff in general, because you don't want to be using the resources in your hand. You want to just be drawing more resources and then just slowly playing bigger dudes or playing more cards to the board, challenging your opponent's characters, and just kind of trying to control the game through the board rather through just hard removal. So I think Blurple definitely got better this set. If you guys have more experience playing the deck, please let us know like this. But I have been impressed so far. I'm just not really sure where the power level lies. I'm sure it's like a fine deck at the moment. But again, without all of those removal tools, and it's not doing something inherently broken, can it really make its way to the top of the meta? I don't know.
I think it's one of the most hyped decks of Set 5. Like, I don't have that much exposure to Lorcana Twitter, but the little I do have is just like Blurple decks. It's just like everybody's like, oh, I just exoed my locals with this Blurple deck, and people seem pretty excited about it. So at least it's been, there's been some life breathed into it, because yeah, I mean, I think that color combination was just like doomed in the past. Like, it was just hopeless because of this lack of removal and inability to sort of. I think it's also has like a strong. It has an inability to be a combo deck as well, where it's like, if you want to talk about like having a proactive game plan of getting ahead on cards, bro, just play Steel Sapphire. Like, just does it a million times better. So there wasn't really a compelling reason to play Blurple. I think one of the most compelling reasons to play Blurple at all is probably Queen's Castle, but I don't think that's good enough. I'd rather be playing Steel Sapphire having access to the additional popsicles, as well as things like a Whole New World. It seems like a better color combo, and also removal. So
yeah, and also just if obviously your card draw engine is probably more so on the Amethyst package, rather than like, maybe you don't need to run Hiram in Blurple, because there's no, I don't mean, like, I'm thinking of purple items and I can't really think of any that are really good, right? You know.
You know what? You know what's funny? There's a deeper conversation to be had here.
Hmm.
I don't know if you guys, if anybody listening to this, and I know Carl, you did, but if you played set one of Lorcana, or you played set two, do you remember like every color combination was like pretty viable because every deck was, for the most part, it was pretty mid rangey. I guess there was some hyper aggro decks, and you couldn't really even call the Ruby Amethyst deck a control deck. I think it was definitely more of a mid range deck, and everybody was like doing this like mid range soup kind of stuff.
Yep.
And I felt like every color combination had a had a place in the metagame. Like things are pretty competitive, and if they weren't, like they were just a couple percent below. I think as we progress in Lorcana, like it was very apparent to me in set 4, but now it's set 5. Like there's just some doomed combinations, and they're doomed from like a fundamentals reason. Like for Blurple is kind of, it's at the top end of that shit tier.
I'll say Amber Sapphire I think is quite doomed in my opinion.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Well, they're doomed for fundamentals though. Like Blurple's kind of doomed because it has no removal, and it's like it doesn't do anything else better than any other deck. Like if you look at all the other combinations of Amethyst, they're like utilizing strengths of Amethyst, but then shoring up its weaknesses with another color, where Sapphire doesn't do that. Things like Steel Ruby, like these colors used to be playable because you could like, oh, I can just play Steel Ruby and then like make a control deck or like make an aggro deck. I can just go fast. Where it's like, because the decks are so powerful now, it's like you need to have like a sort of a strong primary gameplay, and your deck needs to be doing something that's somewhat unfair,
exactly,
or you're just going to lose. And now we're starting to see like there's like these design tenets in each ink color, and when you match two of them together, which don't have exposure to one aspect of Lorcana, whether it's card draw or it's removal or you name it, yeah, then they're just like, they're hopeless. And there are those kind of what feel like to be hopeless ink combinations now, because you can't combining two inks that just have no removal or have no card draw, but then also simultaneously don't really have like a hyper aggressive package that can make up for that. Like they feel doomed.
Yeah. I think, like I said, I think Amber Sapphire. I recently watched Spessie's video where he talked about like 20 different decks he made for set 5, and he was like, I tried to make Amber Sapphire work for so long. He's like, I tried Grand Pabi, I tried some aggro build. I think he settled on this weird like kind of princess-ish deck, but he still had Hiram and Popsicles, because like you have to have some type of draw engine, and if you're doing Amber Sapphire, you have to just utilize Sapphire's draw engine, which is pretty much just Hiram. So yeah, it's pretty rough. I know he was quite high on it's Ruby Emerald at the moment, but that color combination,
yeah, I play,
in general,
that's like the evasive.
It's like the evasive stuff.
Yeah, again, that's at the high end of shit tier. Like it's like this evasive. It has has access to a lot of evasives, and it kind of gets around Medusa pretty well. It has a lot of 3-strength characters. Yeah, I think I've played against that deck. I think it's on the high end of shit tier.
It also uses that new Robin Hood, that new legendary Robin Hood that says it's a 4-cost uninkable 1/4 that quests for 2. That when it quests, you look at the top 4 cards of your deck, and you can cast a song or an action that costs 6 or less for free. So, but all that deck does is it just plays like the best target for that is oh my god, what's it called? A Pirate's Life, right? The one that you gain 2 and your opponent loses 2. So at its core, it's still just trying to it's like a go fast deck realistically with evasive, so it can't be interacted with as easily.
Yeah.
So
I could be wrong, but part of me thinks what's interesting about this combo is I feel like this issue will only get worse unless Lorcana starts breaking its rules when it comes to certain colors. Because like you get, whether it's Sapphire, giving Sapphire more removal that doesn't have significant downside, maybe giving Amethyst more removal that doesn't have significant downside, or giving, better draw engines.
The thing is though, if you I'm sorry.
I know.
I think if you give Amethyst removal stuff, my god.
Exactly.
Everyone will just not like the other colors are just insignificant.
Well, the color identity is key to the game. Like it actually makes the game, because you're making a choice when you're choosing these ink combinations to put together, and you're taking an opportunity cost by not picking something else. So it's like, will this this gap between the good combinations versus the bad combinations, while it might just get worse and it might increase, it's like if we do break our rules to try to shore that up, Like, we might just make every color feel the same. And then that's even worse, because then you'll just always play the best one. Even if it's the best by like 1-2%, it's like, well, they're all the same, so I'll just play the best version of this.
The idea is like
it's a
similar
really
to
interesting concept.
It's similar to like again, you've more experience when it comes to Magic, but Magic has like the whole color wheel thing, right? And like the identity of each color. It's a very similar concept to that, I think. That at its core, is it different?
Well, it has a much different effect. So like, yes, like white theoretically can't do things that red can do. But in Magic, it feels a bit different, because I mean, the land system makes a difference. The whole resource system makes it feel a bit different. I'm trying to think. So like, yes, like your red-white deck should not have the same tools as like a a white-blue control deck.
Yeah, like my knowledge is like blue is like counterspell stuff. Blue is the color that does that, like, you know.
Yeah, I would say it does. The impact of it, in my opinion, just does not feel very similar, because I don't know. Part of it is like, I wonder if part of it is tied to the resource system and how consistent it is and things like that. And all these cards have these like replacement level value of being able to put down as a resource or be played as a card. But it feels, although the Magic color pie philosophy is similar, like certain colors do certain things, other ones do not do this, and they have strict identities. There doesn't feel like these doomed combinations like there is in Lorcana right now, because part of the reason is the power level of Lorcana as well. Because of the way the power level is currently structured, it's like almost every deck has some sort of draw engine in the deck and some sort of removal engine.
Yep.
Like, if you think about the top decks, that's pretty much like what makes a good deck in Lorcana. It's usually draw and removal. There are outliers in the form of, like hyper aggro, and sometimes things like green steel, which was just doing something so unfair that no other deck did. But I would argue it also had card advantage. But yeah, if your ink combination is at this random side, this kind of random area of the ink pie or whatever that might have card draw but then has no removal, it's like you just tend to get owned by these other decks that have both. Yeah, it's interesting.
I don't know, like looking at things now, I'm sure we can say that there are some color combinations that kind of seem doomed, but like the example for me at least already was like I'll be honest, when I first saw this like Amber Emerald deck, I thought it was so bad. I thought it was like such a meme. I was like, I don't know why people are even attempting to try and make this work.
Yeah.
I did. No, seriously. And like, it's before I even knew that the matchup against Green Steel Bucky was bad, right? I just kind of looked at it and I was like how? Like, I remember looking at the decks like, how does this deck win, right? Like, because and like I said, like there are play patterns to it and stuff, but since this is not like the reason why the deck wins by any means, but it's a card that can help if it's played. Introduction of a card like Diablo, right? Diablo obviously came in last set and kind of disrupted. Diablo's given Emerald this like potential super early card advantage, right? And then of course like, Prince John as well is this other form of kind of card advantage for Emerald. So like I think they can still introduce stuff like that, but like they do also have to be careful where these certain things are implemented. So like for example in Amethyst, the removal options, like we said, are extremely limited. It's either you're exerting your opponent's characters, or you have that weird ability where it's like I remove 2 damage from a character and move it.
Or Yzma, which is just like so ass. Remove something. It's like the ultimate tempo card, but it's remove something. They draw 2 cards, which is like not. It's just not great. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like right now that the gaps between like the combinations that have synergy from a fundamentals perspective, I'm not talking about the powerful cards, from a fundamentals perspective, like, hey, let's take ramp and removal. Like, hell, that sounds good. Let's take ramp, card draw, and removal. That's blue steel. The other one was ruby sapphire. And yeah, it just feels like the gap is getting bigger because the decks are getting stronger. Where in set 1, it was like you could really throw together anything because we were all kind of doing combat and doing mid-range stuff, and yeah, we'll see. That's
a fair evaluation, I think, for sure. Yeah. Next comment is from Ivadel. I couldn't help but notice the lack of new blue Fassa in the conversation. Do you guys think this is any indication that the card may not live up to the hype? Love the show. Keep up the good work. So
the hype. The hype. Bro? Who was hyping that card? Not
Oh,
it
yeah.
wasn't us.
Who was hyping that card?
And
Who
hey,
revealed
to be
that
fair,
card? Oh my god.
to be fair, we didn't. I genuinely think we didn't hype it too much. We were pretty critical.
Yeah, I think to be fair, it's one of those cards that can see a great amount of impact in future sets and stuff like that. I find this is often the case where, like, I don't know, we've seen this in previous sets. It's like we look back at the set 3 and the whole like Jafar stuff, right? People are like, oh my god, people were so high on this card, but now this card is like terrible. What were people thinking? Or like, why is this card not good? Like, it's always this kind of overhype of a specific card, and that's not always a bad thing. Just because a card was overhyped and then not played, people think it's like yeah, that just happens in card game. People will see something, they'll misinterpret the power level, and that's not to say that this Mufasa is weak by any means. It's just maybe it just doesn't fit into the current decks of what they want to do. Maybe someone just hasn't found the particular use for it. You know what I mean? So,
well, I do think that, to be fair, I do think it is kind of weak on a fundamentals perspective because, like, just look at every powerful deck in Lorcana and the powerful cards that exist in those decks. Like, what do they do when they enter? They do something when they hit the field. Not, okay, come here, wait a turn. Like, it's just not the world we live in right now. Like, yes.
well, when you play that,
when
you play that Mufasa, you do get basically 2 cards, but then I say you get 2 cards, but then you're tapped out, basically, right? I need that. This is how bad we are, guys. We can't even remember the cards we revealed.
I don't think it has a very relevant enter the battlefield effect, to be honest. Like
you get 2 and you can't utilize them, right? You get 2 and you pass. But
yeah. So, and I think if you look at most of the good cards in this game right now, especially the expensive ones, they do something when they hit the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just don't feel like we live in a reality where you can play something that expensive and hope it stays on the field for a whole turn.
I don't know if you guys talked about it last week, but I do think it's interesting to talk about the chase legendaries, or the legendaries that we're seeing right now in set 5 that have gotten like the most value, have crept up a lot. I know for one is at the start when the set kind of came out, the Clarabelle, which is like the Emerald Cow card, was like $10 or whatever, and now it's like shot up. Because
what does it do again?
So that's the 7 cost inkable 5/6 that reads at the end of your turn, basically draw up to however many cards your opponent has in their hand, which was the same. Yeah. It was like the same as that was on like that uninkable action card, but it's obviously it being attached to a body is a lot better. It's also shift 5, but I don't even know. I'm sure if you shift it, it's quite good, but I don't know how many decks that are utilizing it actually have the shift in it. But I know that's a legendary that shot up in value recently. I think Naveen is still steadily holding its value. I haven't seen him utilizing too many decks so far. I'm sure the card is still quite good, but yeah, it's definitely been interesting to see. The next comment we have is from Kaiser. Daisy 1-drops or Piglet/Smee into Pete, or shift a 1-drop into Naveen. Sing Whole New World going first is like the new Bucky Diablo. Multiple Daisy into a Whole New World is gross too. An Amber Amethyst Daisy into bodyguards like Simba or Donald make it so the only efficient ways to out Daisy are the Sisu. Example, challenging Russian Gaston, Crab, Mini Cogsworth, Fox, etc. all don't work. Amber is kind of cracked going first with the nut draw. Yes, that's kind of been the case with Amber. Steel in general, I'll say. But yeah, I mean, that's the one card that I played against over the weekend that, like, yeah, Daisy has been a menace to play against. I think we all knew that was going to be a powerful card. That's also crept up in value recently. And the downside, to be honest, is it really doesn't matter so far that I've seen, right? It's like if it's a character card, your opponent gets to draw it. If it's not, it's just a 1/4. But yeah, I think if you're pairing it with the bodyguard stuff, it's particularly good. I don't know about like the whole. I think it's better in Whole New World decks than it is in general hyper aggro decks. Not to say it's bad in hyper aggro, but it's just a harder to remove aggro card. But with Whole New World, yeah, you just dump a couple of them, and without a clean way to remove it, like I don't know, like let's say like the Sisu, if you're getting that late, or if you don't have the small Sisu, then yeah, it's a troublesome card. What were your thoughts on that card initially, Brennan? Like, did you anticipate that? Yeah, this will be a card that's just going to be pretty relevant in Amber going forward. Yeah.
Yes, I thought so. But I mean, it just looked like the card that broke the mold, right? So, yeah, it just seems very, very powerful. Yeah, I don't know if it's as powerful as Diablo. It's not as much of a must answer. I remember, I think Moyne and I had that question. We may have had on the question, the pod before that. People were like, "Oh, is this like Diablo? Is it a must answer?" It's like, I think card is very powerful, and it can, it definitely gets a significant advantage if unanswered. But it's not like Diablo, where it's like if you don't answer in 2 turns, it's like it just it feels like that game is kind of doomed. Like,
Yeah,
you just fall behind a card advantage, and like even if they don't win on that turn, they're just gonna win on a future turn because of all the value.
I think the bodyguard stuff is kind of relevant to talk about a little bit in terms of, yeah, it does protect it a little bit. Like when I saw the 1/4, I was like, okay, if you're playing against, if you're facing like Ruby Amethyst or whatever, you're gonna exert that. Fox will just probably cleanly take it out on turn 3 or whatever. So maybe bodyguard prevents that a little bit, but then can get around that with like that small Sisu or worth a brawl or whatever. But it's definitely been one of the more excuse me, one of the more impactful cards to come out of set 5 for sure. Jay says, hi guys, I've been a Ruby Amethyst player in the past, but it seems like it's falling out. In your opinion, does the Mim Elephant fit into that deck or another Amethyst deck? What are your thoughts on that card, Brennan? Are you familiar with the card?
I'm not familiar with the Mim Elephant.
It's 4 cost, 3/7 quest for 1. When you play this character, banish her or return another chosen character of yours to your hand, so just the bounce effect basically. At the start of your turn, you may move up to 2 damage counters from this character to chosen opposing character. So it's a 4 cost 3/7, you bounce something basically.
I mean, it seems fine, I guess. So let's think about the fundamentals of the rest of the bounce package. So, Matamin Fox comes down with Rush, which is actually pretty important. So you're dealing the later a bounce card like that comes down, theoretically, the worse it is, because a lot of these things are like the reason you play all these bounce cards is because they're cheap and they allow you to facilitate your draw engine in the mid to late game, but then also they allow you to contest board early. So 4/7 that would contest board for sure, but it's on turn 4.
It's a 3/7, sorry, just so you know.
Yeah, sorry, a 3/7, and your turn 4 is also, you have a lot of you have very good turn 4s. You have Goat, you have Rabbit, you have Castle. So it's already a very contested slot, and I think it's antithetical to the power or what makes things like Madam Snake and Madam Fox powerful, which is they're coming down super early and they're stopping your opponent from getting this crazy advantage. In the early few turns of the game when you don't really have exposure to the board very often in the form of Ruby Amethyst. So it's like stopping those aggressive strategies. So we've had this happen in the past with like the big monomim where people are like, oh, there were other bounce cards. People are like this looks great, and it's like, no, that's actually not like that's not what makes the bounce package powerful. It's like it's more about what it does fundamentally. So I think the more expensive a bounce card is, the worse it is in the sense of facilitating your draw engine with the Rabbit, and also the worse it is at contesting board and insulating you against aggro, which I think is the other use case. So I wouldn't come out and say this card is terrible. I would just say as we progress on the amount of ink it costs, theoretically the worse it is. And the 3/7, the quest for 1 that's moving around damage counters, like I don't see it.
The thing is, right, and that's a very fair evaluation. I do agree that as the turns go on, the bounce stuff gets less relevant. I think the situation where bouncing something is fine is, let's say you've played a 3 cost card. Let's just say you played Maleficent, right? And then maybe you sing Friends with Maleficent and bounce that, and then you've got a 3/7 on turn 4, it's fine. But like ultimately we're still gonna come back to the thing we were talking about earlier, which is a deck needs to do something that is fundamentally broken or just extremely powerful. And Ruby Amethyst right now, like we haven't seen anything else kind of come from set 5. It's still realistically gonna be the Flynn on 2, the Sisu, and then the Castle on 4, and Madam M just doesn't really fit into that too well at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how people want to work it into the deck. But I personally think that the best addition to Ruby Amethyst this set has been the Ruby Chromicon, which is the 1 cost inkable item that when you exert it, you can give one of your characters +1 attack. Because I think that can turn your characters into really, really strong powerhouses. Like, suddenly Fox is hitting for 5, Maui's hitting for 7. Even your Mims are hitting for 4 now, which could be relevant. So I think that's the card I've been most impressed by so far as an inclusion to Ruby Amethyst.
So the reason I picked this comment is it says, Hey guys, I've been an RA player in the past, but it seems like it's falling out. And I want to give this person a bit of consolation because RA always feels like it's falling out at the beginning of a set. I, I mean, I can't even remember the last set where we came out of the gate and it was like Ruby Amethyst is great. Maybe was it the beginning of set 3? I mean, maybe
set 2. I think definitely.
yeah, set 2.
Yeah.
Ever since then, it was like, wow, look at all these powerful things we can do that are not Ruby Amethyst, and like the deck really, floats around here and there. It doesn't really surge in popularity until like the mid to late game or mid to late part of a metagame. So yeah, I feel like Ruby Amethyst always seems like it's like, okay, we finally passed the litmus test of Ruby Amethyst no longer being good, because that's the benchmark. A deck is really powerful once you can get past this like Jund-esque Ruby Amethyst deck. So it always feels like that at the beginning of a metagame.
For sure, yeah. Next comment is from Plant. Why are cards so much more expensive in the US than Europe? For example, Clarabelle spiked on TCG Player when it was getting streamed by some popular people, mostly European, to like $30. Like 5 days later, it's still less than $10. Would love to hear your take, not just from a macro econ cost of living level, maybe more about how Europe players and US players might or might not differ in terms of how much they buy into any given TCG. Well, it's lucky we've got a European and an American on the podcast, isn't it? So
yeah, I mean, well, all I can say is like historically with supply, Europe had way better supply than the US.
Yeah, I don't think that's the issue particularly now. But what I will say is just in context of this, I have to tell you what Kim told me to do at the start of this week. She was like, Cree, if you're going over to Toronto, you used to pack your entire bag with all of our spare rares, all of your enchanted Ursulas, all of your playmats, and just see how much you can get for it. And I will be doing that. All of my Ursula playmats, if I have any Stitch stuff left, I will go over to vendors, and even vendors who obviously traditionally will offer lower than whatever TCG, it will probably still be more than if I try and sell on card market and have the hassle of shipping stuff out. So yeah, so that's not really helping the conversation here, but I will see if there's a major difference, because I'm also interested. But yeah, I mean, typically that's just been the case for a while. I don't know particularly why. Originally it definitely was the supply level, but that being said, initially Europe did get more supply, but in that whole set 1 era, supply was still really, really low everywhere. Sure, maybe the price of boxes were still higher in the States, but prices of boxes in Europe were still also egregiously high. Like, we were talking 200 euros for like one booster box, right? But right now I'm not too sure why. Maybe it's just how the market is being held. Like, I think maybe there is just more availability in Europe for specific cards, or maybe people just want to sell stuff higher in the States. Again, this is not my area of expertise. If I don't know, has this been kind of the case after Flesh and Blood has developed? Have you ever seen there's like a major difference? Has it still been?
No, never seen a disparity between the two regions like that. Could be distribution could be way different for Flesh and Blood. Popularity could be different. I don't know the intricacies of like the buying power of the American population versus like the aggregate European population. So I have no idea. All I know is in regards to Lorcana, it was like initially linked to supply, where Europe had drastically better supply than the US. Also, the US has this like, you guys don't have like big box retailers. Do you? Maybe you do, but you don't have like Target and stuff. Like, we have like big box.
So we do have in terms of, it's the same as the US, where like you'll have like your local game store release, and then 2 weeks later you'll have your wide release, and that would be in like a toy store, or
okay.
There's even stores that are like, I don't know. So there's a store in Europe, in Ireland, the UK most notably, called Tesco, which just has like, it's probably like your Target or your Walmart. Like, it has everything pretty much, right? It has like fucking clothes, it has toys, it has groceries, it has everything you need. But not to the extent that America has stuff. Like, you can't go and buy a tire for your car and also pick up some bananas in Europe in the same place,
You can't get alcohol and a firearm.
And a firearm. No, you cannot get that here. But
there's also, I don't know what the scalping culture is like in Europe. In America, it is pretty significant. So there is like, I don't want to make some people feel seen or triggered here, but there's definitely a sort of a cult of Facebook marketplace moms that run around and scalp the living shit out of some of this stuff. Like, they drive around these Targets and Barnes and Nobles all day, and then they try to scalp this stuff on Facebook Marketplace. It is definitely a thing that happens. And that was definitely what happened in set one, by the way, is like there was like these watch groups and you would have these people who effectively, I don't want to, yeah, I mean, if they effectively did not have jobs, would just be waiting for it to get stocked, would know the people that were stocking it and would just like turbo it out as soon as it got into like a Target or something like that. And you would see it on Facebook Marketplace later for, 5, 10x. It's a good side hustle, but the scalping culture in the United States is pretty significant. I don't know how it is in Europe.
It's funny.
In Europe, maybe people actually have to work for a living.
It's funny when I just in relation to the whole idea of like scalping and people trying to get as much product as possible. Since I wasn't on the podcast last week, I will mention that I did work the D23 promo launch event in the Disney store here in Dublin, which is a lot of fun. I had the job of looking after the artist, which is really, really cool. She drew the 2-drop Ursula card I was talking about earlier, which I'm a huge fan of, the Emerald one, so I got her to sign a couple of cards. And yeah, we had some people that, my God, were like constantly trying to come around the queue and buy and buy and buy. And we were trying to monitor it pretty close, and there was 1 or 2 people that definitely like kind of got by, because obviously they'd go to, say, I think we had sorry, oh, I was about to sneeze. Say we had about like 2 or 3 people at the register, they would just go to like the other person so that they wouldn't be able to. And obviously I'm trying to monitor, but I'm also trying to look after the artists and get signatures sorted and stuff like that. So yeah, that was really interesting to kind of work, but I had a great time. The other thing as well, and this is just in Ireland at least, I think generally in the US, so any local game stores that you go to, Brendan, is it quite common that you can buy singles at most of them for card games?
Yes.
In the shop, yeah. So at least where I am, and this is like, Ireland's a very small portion of Europe, but it's quite uncommon. There's a few, maybe for like, for Magic or for Pokemon, that have like a few binders, but whenever I think of local game stores in the US, I think of like the glass cabinets with all of the kind of cards laid out and stuff like that. That's just not really what local game stores are in Ireland. And there's probably a few of them in the UK, sure, but for the most part, from what I've heard from a lot of American players and stuff, they're like, oh yeah, I'll go to my local game store and I'll buy a couple of cards there from the shop, because like, sure, you don't have to wait for shipping, you don't have to wait for cards to be delivered and stuff like that. So I don't know if that affects things either, if there's less of that in Europe. Again, that's just my experience, but yeah, we're really talking about an area of stuff that we're not too experienced on, but it's if anyone has more knowledge on this, please let us know down below in the comments for sure. Next comment is from Va. What are Ravensburger / Disney waiting to see in terms of doing any marketing for the game? I would have thought it was an obvious choice to do as soon as they realized they were massively underprinting sets, although they are now overprinting, in my opinion. I do keep hearing like whispers of like, oh, we're finally starting our marketing campaign, or we're finally pushing it. And I'm like, didn't they say that after set 3 they were going to start doing that? But to be fair, like, I still haven't seen like a massive like global amount of marketing for the game, which yeah
I do. The insight I do have is that for the most part, that team they came on pretty recently, so we'll see. I know that I think it was it set 3? They said after some set they're like, okay, that's when we're gonna start marketing the game. Yeah, I would like to see some big marketing, because Lorcana is one of the few TCGs I feel like has actual mass appeal, and can be played casually. So we could really push this game over the edge if they start marketing it. That being said, they definitely have done some marketing. For instance, it was on the news over in Australia.
I heard about that.
Like that.
Yeah. You saw when I sent it to the group chat. Yeah,
that was hilarious.
I was going onto Facebook, and I saw that. So for the D23 thing, they had a pop-up shop, like a pop-up Disney store in Australia, and loads of people drove there from like all over the country and stuff. It was a great time, and I sent it to a Ravensburger staff member. I was like, oh, check this out, like the game made like national news in Australia, you should pass this on to the team. And they were like, yeah, we know it made news. Yeah, we might have had some influence there, which was really, really cool. But yeah, like the other notable thing I want to say, maybe not, it doesn't really relate too much to marketing, but I mean, we've already talked about this kind of earlier in this podcast, but players coming over from other TCGs, it's really happening right now, is all I'll say. There's players coming over from Yu-Gi-Oh! There's players coming over from Flesh and Blood. And a lot of those players, I think for the most part, reasons why I've seen players come over, and it makes sense at the end of the day, is like they're looking at how much money can be made from some of the events like this, right? It's like if you perform very well, you can make a lot of money. I think there's been a few One Piece players as well I've seen that have come over. So I think still overall great thing for the game. Sure, like they might be doing it for the money, which, like, I mean, that's fair. I'm not gonna criticize anyone from doing that. If you're good at what you do and you want to make money while doing it, sure. But overall, I think it's a good thing because it's people, if it's a professional player with a lot of community behind them and a fan base, and they're kind of diving into a new TCG. Hopefully, that brings players with them, and you'll have this like kind of cross pollination between some TCGs. Because previously we've talked about, like, I don't know, a lot of other players from TCGs calling Lorcana quite simple, and like, why would I play this game? Like, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of depth and there's not a lot of that and stuff like that. But we're seeing the transition now, and I think even if they're coming just for the money, they're actually seeing the depth of the game the more they play it and the more they kind of test. Like, from the outside, it might still seem like that, but yeah. Overall, I mean, like, well, it's been like a year of Lorcana. I'm still just really impressed of how well the like organized play scene has been going. Over the past.
That's the
past
big
year.
one.
Yeah,
We're consistently selling out 2K player caps. It's crazy. No other game does that. Like, Flesh and Blood never hits its cap for an event. I don't think ever.
It's slowed down for us, just so you know. Like for Bologna, I don't know if it was full, but like tickets were really trickling along. And then for Birmingham, I don't know if you can still buy tickets now, but it was the same thing for a couple of weeks. But like that initial spike, I mean, you remember Atlanta, I remember Lille. My God, it was just, you had to be so lucky. You'd be fucking on the dot to get those.
Yeah, I think that's the nature of these things is, people don't feel like they have to go, and there's like 5 of them, and you're on like the 4th or 5th. At the same time, they also got rid of Pixelborn recently, which I think really alienated a lot of the player base and people that were engaging with the game, because like now it's just, let's be real, it's just much harder to play the game. So yeah, I think that might slow down the competitive. Yeah, we're not going to have the same thing we were having a few months ago when there was millions of games being played. I don't know if it was like per month, but the amount of games being played on the platform was insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's pretty much the building section. I think we had someone just asking your thoughts on Hyper Aggro. I think Hyper Aggro just remains in the same spot that it was. I know Spessy was actually pretty high on a version of Amethyst Amber, as I feel he always is at the start of a
Yeah,
set.
I was gonna say, just go ask Spessy. Like, he's gonna try to sell you a Hyper Aggro deck. He's like he's like a shifty snake oil salesman with Hyper aggro decks every time a new set comes out.
You want a Daisy Duck? You want a Daisy Duck?
Opens the trench coat.
Trench coat.
Like, he's got stuff for sale.
It's funny. I
aggro decks.
When I started playing Pixelborn Connect on last Friday, I ran into Spessy. He thought I was like stream sniping them, and he was playing Amber Amethyst Hyper Aggro, and I was playing my deck. And I eventually did the Under the Sea to him, and I kept holding him hostage. He was on 19 lore. I kept holding him hostage because I had like the muses on the board, so I could keep bouncing all of his like one strength characters back to his hand. But then he was like, "Oh yeah, like so many cards in my deck, I just win the game if I top deck." He was playing like 4 of those whatever, it's the cards, something knowledge, just like the 2-cost uninkable, gain 2 lore. He was playing spell books. He was like, "Oh, so many cards would have won me the game." But yeah, that was, I found that quite funny. I feel like that's kind of natural for Spessy though. Like, as the type of content creator he is, like he still does a great job of like testing and highlighting nearly as many decks as many color combinations, which, to be honest, I wouldn't be too fond of doing. Like we were saying, right? I don't think I'm gonna, like, unless I've seen a good few cards that I think are really gonna kick something off. I don't think I'm gonna start by sitting down at set 5 and saying, right, I'm gonna make Amber Sapphire work. Let's go. And I spend like 4 days just wanting to die, and I switch to a good deck.
That's what he loves.
He loves that though, which is great. I mean, it's good. It's good to see people actually being able to test this stuff, because not everyone wants to do it. So
yeah, he's like, bro, I'm on the Magicka D spell.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you enjoy this podcast, the number one thing you can do is leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps us so much. There's a video version of this on YouTube at youtube.com/@Podcana podcast. I think we're at 3.93, something like that. Subscribers would be cool if we get 4K by next week. Maybe surprise Moyen. Twitter's at BrendanAPG, at Kawatech_CG. And we will see you all next week.